What's good, everybody? Oh my gosh. Robin E here, checking in, and we are back on another episode of Pillow Talk Podcast, Season 6. It feels really good, actually, to be back behind the mic. It's been, it's been a few weeks since we've last talked, but if you've been following me online, on Instagram, Robin E93, or Facebook, Pillow Talk Podcast, or my personal, then you'll know my father died. My father died July 1st, a day that changed my life, to say the least. And you couldn't have told me this year that was going to happen. You couldn't have predicted it. You couldn't have bet me any amount of money that my dad was going to die this year. Nonetheless, he did. And now I'm in a space of just trying to figure out what a new normal is, right? So this episode is personal. I really want to highlight my dad and dive deep into some of the things that led to his demise, because I think that they could help other people. And just honestly talking about it feels very therapeutic to me. But before I get to that, I have to shout out a very, very important person in my life. My cousin, Erifa Brown. Look, I didn't put her government out there. I'm sorry, Erifa. My cousin, Erifa. That wasn't her last name. I made that up. She is my dad's niece, and she was there for his service. After his service, the next day, I went over to her house to spend some time with her, my Uncle Patrick, just my dad's side of the family. And Erifa gave me some really, really, really good advice. And in a way, it kind of felt like an okay from my dad. It kind of felt like a blessing. It kind of felt like, if you're going to do it, do it. And I don't know if it's the woman that she is, because she's been through so much throughout her life. She's experienced so many things. She just has so much knowledge. I don't know if it's her stature that made me really consider it, but it just kind of gave me the push to talk about this, because it's personal as fuck. And I want to be as vulnerable as possible. And I don't really care what anybody has to say about what I'm about to say. I'm going to say it because it's my story to tell. So, gotta give a shout out to my cousin Erifa for that. Also, I am recording at home, okay? So if you hear some cars, vroom, vroom, and you hear some sirens, bling, blinging, it's ambiance. It's a part of, the detail. Just ignore that shit. Just ignore that shit. I also want to give a shout out to my man. Thank you to my man. I think it's very important for people to date people for an extended period of time, right? So that you can experience different situations and see how people function in different situations and how they deal with different emotions. Obviously, this has never happened to me before. I've never lost a parent. So I have been going through a lot of emotions, a lot of just down feelings, right? And having somebody there who understands me, understands when I'm in distress is so important. There were a few moments where I kind of didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, how I was feeling. And for my man to kind of swoop in and save the day and kind of reiterate, that I need this support right now, I feel like was just chef's kiss. I couldn't have made it through the service without him. I couldn't have made it through this process without him. So thank you to my man. And lastly, like I said, I want to acknowledge other people who are going through this, who are going through the grieving process of losing a parent or has lost a parent in the past, in addition to anyone who is affected by someone who is an addict. Now, before we get to the hard shit, because it's definitely some hard shit I got to talk about, it's only right to pay tribute to the most amazing man that I've ever known, and that is my dad, Robert Earl Tinker Jr., okay? Bam! That's a handsome fella right there, if I do say so myself, all right? My dad was an amazing guy, from Chicago, repping the South Side, everywhere really, but, repping the South Side. And he really instilled a lot of character in me. I remember growing up, he always took us out to eat, like every weekend. He cooked Sunday dinner for us every Sunday. And he always made sure that we ate dinner as a family. Those are some of the things that I really, really loved about him, and some of the values that, I kept within me. I would go to other people's houses. They'd be eating all types of places, or they'd be eating all types of random shit. And I'd be like, I gotta go home. I gotta go home and eat. People also used to come and eat at our house, okay? My dad would cook food, and he would invite people over sometimes just to come and eat. He would invite my uncle over to come and eat, my grandma, anybody that was around locally, family, he would invite you over to eat. He also was just an amazing cook, period. He used to bake. He made amazing desserts. He made a great sweet potato pie that he inherited the recipe from his mother. And he made this 5-flavored caramel pound cake that is just one of a kind, okay? But my dad could cook anything. I mean, anything. And he cooked everything from scratch. That is why I am greedy now, because for all of my life, my dad has always catered to whatever the hell I wanted to eat. Outside of his culinary skills, my dad was a talker. He's probably the reason why I'm a talker. He's probably the reason why I like to have conversation, because he was all about it. Now, don't get me wrong. We got whoopings. You feel me? He definitely whooped my ass, but he would give me a lecture. It was always lectures over whoopings. If he had the opportunity to lecture you versus whooping you, he would lecture you. My older brother, however, took the whooping. So there's that. In addition to that, my dad was just like a pop culture fanatic. I feel like he also instilled that in me too. Movie fanatic, TV fanatic, just good storytelling fanatic. He had me watching Forrest Gump when I was like 8 years old. Hands down, one of my favorite movies still to this day. He also had me watch an Interview with the Vampire, which is also another one of my favorite movies, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, another one of my favorite movies. But he always talked to me like I understood stuff, even when I didn't understand it as a younger kid. And I really appreciate him for that, because it allowed me to think. It allowed me to think about what he said, pour it in, digest it, use it in my own terms, in my own words. He just really planted a lot of amazing seeds in me. So I was really, really grateful for that. One of the things I loved about my dad was that he was so modest about me. Like, he would brag about me, obviously, which was great. But when I started going through puberty, baby, we had our moments. And I think for him, he always dreaded that day. When I was younger, I was, definitely a daddy's girl. He would make like Barney noises, and, he would carry me around. He would take me everywhere with him. When I was like three or four, he took me to a family reunion down south. It was just me and him, hanging out. I was a baby, and he just took me. So when I was younger, I spent a lot of time with my dad. And then obviously as I got older, I became a girl, and, that sort of rift, came into place. I think he initially struggled with talking to me, because now I was, going through puberty. I went to puberty like 8th grade. But once I matured a little bit, me and him were able to have more honest conversations. But as I was getting ready to go to college, you know what I'm saying? It was definitely like, fuck what you talking about. I'm about to go be an adult. I don't care what you're saying. But I appreciate him, though, nonetheless. He really instilled a lot in me. He was protective. I mean, he also had great taste in music. That's also why I love music and I have such a broad taste. My dad listened to rock, he listened to jazz, he listened to hip hop, but R&B, soul, that was absolutely his bread and butter. Temptations, one of his favorite groups ever. The Stylistics, one of his favorite groups ever. He used to watch this Motown Review like every night for like 2 years. And now I'm like scrambling trying to find it somewhere, right? When I was younger, I couldn't stand watching it after a certain point because he watched it straight for like 2 years. But my dad always instilled confidence in me. And he believed in me way before I believed in myself. When I started out doing media, it was really, really, really hard. And I was doing a lot of free shit. And I was doing a lot of the same type of things, you know? People weren't booking me. I wasn't getting paid. It just seemed like nothing was happening. I remember one day I came home when I was still living with my parents, and I just cried to them. I just cried to them, and I said, I don't understand, why people don't want to book me. I don't understand why people don't want to work with me. I'm out here busting my ass. What do I need to do? So my dad told my mom to mark the date on the calendar. And he said, you are paying your dues. That's all you're doing. Your time is coming, and it's going to come sooner than you think. And we're going to look back on this day, and we're going to see how long it took for this to happen. Because it's going to happen. My dad always made me feel like I was supposed to be doing this shit. He always made me feel like everything that I got, I deserved. I was supposed to get it. And that makes me feel proud, but it also encouraged me to work hard to appreciate and obtain because I deserve that shit. So I'm always thankful for my dad for instilling that strength in me, instilling that work ethic in me, that pride and that dream of knowing that working hard and preparation, there's no reason why you don't deserve it. So, my dad had his things, right? Everybody got their things. He loved to gamble. Now, he wasn't like a big roller, you know what I'm saying? He wasn't hitting for nothing, but he won the lottery a few times. He won a few small fortunes. He played the lottery every day, about 2 times, maybe 3 times a day. He had to have his cigarettes, you know what I'm saying? He struggled with money management, and he had his drugs. And when you look at the list of things that he has, drugs will always top that list of his thing. My dad, who was in the Navy, very young, his parents signed him up because he was in the streets, began doing heroin during his time in the service. So my dad started doing heroin when he was like 19 years old. And when he met my mom, he had been in and out of rehab 9 times. So he's been struggling with drug addiction all his life, basically, since he was a kid. I did not know my dad was doing drugs probably until I was in high school. Once I started smoking weed, I started staying out a little later, right? Started picking up from weed men's and cruising the streets. And I remember like running into my dad a few times outside. And I'd be like, Dad, hey, what are you doing outside? Like I'd be at my friend's house. We'd be, outside riding around, whatever. And I'd run into my dad, like at the gas station. And at that time, it wasn't clicking to me right away. But as time went on and I started noticing how we were going with less and less, then I started piecing it together. I didn't know at that time that he was using heroin. I just knew that there was some drug involved. Now, also knowing how long he had been doing drugs, I can recall different times, right before high school, where I think that he started to really binge. And we started going out to dinner, that kind of slowed down. Us going out bowling, things like that kind of slowed down. We used to do this big, like, back to school shopping every year that, like, stopped completely. And then it trickled into lights off, gas off, no food. So when I was 13, I started working. I got a job when I was 13 years old. I was a camp counselor. Shout out to Kids Club. Shout out to Kids Club. Shout out to the CAP program. Shout out to Hector Cheese, Mr. Sanchez, for giving kids like me an opportunity to make money that really needed it. But I've been working ever since I was 13. But those were the moments where I didn't understand why we were without. And instead of me trying to figure it out, I just I'm going to get a job so I can just get the things that I want. Once I, discovered that he was using drugs, I was on my way to college. So I was kind of like, I'm out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with this shit. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to investigate. But all that did was leave my little brother there to be traumatized. If you don't know, with addicts, they steal, obviously, to supply. So my dad, who never stole from me, stole from my little brother a lot. And he pawned things. My dad used to wear jewelry. He used to dress really nice and stuff like that. And then it just got to a point where all that shit stopped. And what before were things of leisure and luxury, right, became unnecessary expenses that we didn't need anymore. And then I think he got comfortable with less because he knew that he was able to get more drugs. Now that I have less, you know what I'm saying? Or now that I don't have to use as much money to pay for bills or whatever the case is, I can have more drugs. We'll just all suffer. I remember going to my aunt's house to take a shower and to go to sleep and eat and things like that, use electricity, because we went without it for like a really long time at one point. And it was really sad, But again, at that time, I didn't realize that it was a direct indicator. Once I did, because after college, I came back home, right? And I stayed with my parents, and my mom actually had a kidney transplant. So she was going through recovery. She was trying to just, make it do what it do. So my dad was taking care of her. He was very involved. He was driving back and forth to the hospital. He was very involved with her during that process. So in my mind, I'm thinking that he's not using anymore because he's dealing with all this shit with my mom, paying for gas, doing this, doing that. I'm thinking that he don't even have time. Whole time, he's got a lot of time to do it because she's laid up, she's sick, she's on a regimen. So he had a lot more time to dive deeper into that hole. The crazy thing about it is that it did not hinder our relationship as much as people would think. I knew that my dad had an addiction, but he was such an active father that a lot of the times I forgot, to be completely honest. He was always there. He, cooked for us. He came to, almost everything. I mean, every day I knew where he was at, and he wasn't violent, and we weren't necessarily living in shacks, but we moved a lot. We did. So my love for him never really changed, I also come from addiction, come from that lifestyle. On my mom's side, specifically growing up, we saw that on a regular basis. So I think I was used to seeing addiction. I was used to seeing people use drugs on a regular basis, but function and not think twice about it. And I think that same notion kind of played over with me when it came to my dad. Nonetheless, it definitely created a different aura in the family, especially once he started taking from my brother. And once my brother got older and started kind of fighting back on that, it became a whole thing. My dad became withdrawn at a certain point where he was talking a little less. He wasn't as social. He stopped reaching out to his family. He didn't like going outside. All of the things that kind of settle in when you're really into your addiction, because your day revolves around that. We never had a conversation about his addiction, which hurts my heart to this day because I wanted to have that conversation. Before my dad got sick, it was something that was already on the table. And I was hoping, I was hoping that he would be comfortable enough to have the conversation with me. But I understand why he probably didn't want to do that, you know? I completely understand why he probably felt like that was a bad idea. So, unfortunately, we never got to have it. The reality is, you know, loving somebody through addiction is not easy. And when you are dealing with somebody who's had an addiction for so long, it's hard for them to see that it's a problem. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how you feel. If they don't think it's a problem, it'll never be a problem. Although I love my dad, I was hurt. I was hurt to go without. I was hurt knowing that I could run into him somewhere while he was high or while he was getting high. In a way, you know, it became embarrassment for me because as I got older, you know, people started recognizing that he was my dad. And I don't think he really knew that. I don't think he really knew the visibility that comes with being like a public person. I remember I was dating somebody back in the day and, you know, he sold, you know, hard and things like that. And I said, "Do you know my dad?" And he like, "Yeah, I seen him around," type of thing. And I'm like, don't ever sell to this nigga ever in your life. If you see him out there getting some shit from somebody, clip it. And obviously I can't ask him to, you know, to risk his life, but, or, you know, intervene with my dad. But just the fact that I even had to ask a nigga that's out there selling shit if he knew my dad, I felt like spoke volumes about how bad the addiction was. And then there's a part of you that, you know, wants them there. I didn't want my dad strung out on the street somewhere. I didn't want him away from his family. I honestly don't think that he would have survived this long without his family. There's a certain level of love that keeps a person going, right? And I think that the love from his family absolutely kept my dad going. Especially these last few years, I think so. My nephew was living with them, so he was helping raise his grandson. So I'm sure that brought a new breath of life into him. However, his addiction, his need for getting high, the desire to get high never stopped. And we could love him all day, pour into him all day. But that was and became his main focus at some point. I often think, am I addicted to weed, right? Am I addicted to the feeling of enabling somebody just because I want that person there, you know? It's a weird feeling. And I think that me and my mom, in a way, have that addiction of enabling in order to keep somebody around. Because like I said, this addiction, it didn't start with my dad, not for my mom, you know. She witnessed drug abuse years before she met my dad. But it's a matter of how you can love someone while also hating the choices that they make. And I think that takes another level of understanding. Like my mom, she's a superhero for even tolerating everything that my dad put her through for so long. And I got to be honest, because this is a part of his legacy. This is a part of who he is. It doesn't make him any less great than who he was. He's still an amazing man who had an addiction. And the addiction affected his family. You know, it affected our lives. It affected my life. But I have to acknowledge my part in the situation, knowing that he had an addiction and feeling helpless in the situation when I possibly could have done something. Mind you, my dad was in his 60s. So, you know, he was pretty set in his ways. He was pretty, get out my face, leave me alone. But, you know, you can't help but think there's always something that you could have done. So, how did my dad die? I gotta take a drink on that. So, my dad had an infection. He fell. He said he fell. And he messed up his legs. And they began to swell and they began to fill with pus. And it got so bad to the point that he could not walk. He became bedridden. In addition to him becoming bedridden, he stopped getting up to use the bathroom. So he started soiling himself and things of that nature. He had a friend who he calls a friend. He wasn't a friend. He was a nigga that he was getting high with. And he would come by and help my dad from time to time. But he also was supplying my dad heroin. And he probably was getting money from my dad so he could get his heroin. Mind you, my dad was sick. Okay? He had his legs fucked up. He couldn't walk. So this man was picking him up out of the house. Or he was coming inside of the house, going into the bedroom and administering heroin to my dad. So we were going back and forth with my dad because it got to a point where, like I said, he wasn't moving. He was immobile. He was getting really sick. He stopped eating, things like that. So we ended up calling the hospital. They ended up taking him. He left. A couple days went by. Called the hospital again. He goes up there, VA rather. He leaves again. And then this next time, he's just really bad. He starts hollering when he's moved. His legs are just super fucked up. Like, he's just hollering. So call the ambulance. He goes to the hospital. He gets admitted. They do tests. They say he has serious infection. The infection is down to his bone. And he's malnourished. So they say they need to do a surgery on his legs. They think that they can save his legs. But they say that if he does not take proper care, he's going to lose his legs. That was the diagnosis. Mind you, my dad was still using heroin all this time, right? So the first couple times when he went to the hospital, they gave him some antibiotics while he was there, and he stopped taking them once he left. So the infection increased and it got bad. He felt as though the heroin would subside the pain, even though he needed antibiotics. So that was the first thing. Now he gets the surgery. They say it was a success. They clear off some of his skin. They clear off the infection, right? And the next day, barely 24 hours after he had surgery, my dad tries to leave the hospital. He calls me. He calls my brothers, cusses us out because we're not coming to get him. And he calls that friend, who of course is down because he wants to get high too. So the friend picks him up. They go and get high, stupid high. He brings him to the house, bring him to my mom and dad house. And my mom said she saw my dad. He was so out of it. She said she felt like he wasn't even looking at her. She felt like he was just so high. He was just so out of it. He didn't even know where the fuck he was. They carry my dad up the stairs. They end up dropping my dad. Call the hospital. He goes right back to the hospital after he left the day before. And then, while he is in the hospital, while he's in the hospital after this time, he calls his friend to come up there, whatever the case is. The friend gets him high while he's in the hospital. My dad overdosed one time while he was in the hospital. This was a couple of weeks before he died. They had to give him Narcan. So this guy was coming up to the hospital as my dad was in the hospital bed and administering heroin to him. They were getting high together. It got to a point where police got involved and they started searching everybody, right, that came to the room because they knew what was going on. So after my dad goes back that last time, he stays because after falling, he can't talk. His speech is slurred, his hand movements are delayed, everything is just out of place. And the doctors aren't sure why. They do an MRI, they see no signs of stroke, anything like that, so they don't know what's going on. Time goes by, he gets worse. He has trouble swallowing his food. He's not able to maintain his body heat. And then he starts having stomach bleeding. So they did a surgery on his stomach to try to stop the bleeding in hopes that that would help regulate his body temperature because he was losing blood. And every day his blood count kept dropping. My dad had like 2 blood transfusions while he was there because he just kept losing blood. Time went on and the doctors kept assuring us that he was very sick. About a week before he died, the doctors talked to my mom about a DNR, and that's when she kind of knew that we were getting to the end. I knew that my dad was dying. I didn't know exactly what from, but I knew that he was dying. He looked bad. He was really small. He was really skinny. He wasn't coherent, and he was mean towards the end. He didn't want any help. So those last few days, his breathing started failing. He ended up getting pneumonia, which is actually a common thing that people with heroin get because heroin suppresses your lung capacity and pneumonia affects your lungs. So he had pneumonia, which suppressed his breathing even more, put him in, like a respiratory state. And the night before he died, my mom called me and basically said the doctor said there's nothing else they can do. Everything's in the red. And we just want to make him comfortable. So I knew that was it. I knew that was it. So the next morning, I got up early in the morning, and I drove to the hospital. And I sat with my dad for about an hour, and I watched him take his last breath. And I just cried. And I had to make the call to everybody.
And it was the hardest shit I ever had to do in my life. So he passed from encephalopathy, encephalopathy, which is a combination of brain disorders. He contracted the disease due to heroin abuse. So basically, his brain stopped working. And he didn't have control over his body, which is why his breathing failed and his body started shutting down. And I think that night when he left the hospital, I think he intended to die. I think that he wanted to overdose. And I think he took a lot of heroin in the hopes that maybe he wasn't going to wake up. But he did. And he stayed alive for 3 more weeks, battling this disease, which ultimately took his life. My dad was not perfect. And this addiction was the ugliest part of him. And it killed him. But I can't help but think about all the years that passed along where nobody intervened. Nobody thought to talk. Nobody thought to stop. And there's a possibility that could it have been changed? Could it have been different? Hell yeah, I believe so. But the stigma behind what goes on in our house stays in our house is so detrimental to our people. If I was in a position to ask someone to help save my father, that's what I should have did. Instead of trying to protect a secret that everybody's ashamed of. I lost my father because he could not get off drugs. And he had a family. He had a life. He had a job. He had friends. He had purpose. And he still did drugs. So what do you do with that? How do you grieve somebody who chose something over you, something that ultimately ended their life? I have, some anger inside of me about my dad, absolutely. But I accepted who he was years ago. And I guess a part of me made peace knowing that this could happen. It doesn't soften the blow, but it makes it easier to swallow. I was addicted, addicted to what was, what could possibly be if we all just stick together. What could be, what has been, what should be, But deep down inside, I always knew he was going to choose the heroin over us. And we fought that heroin to the last breath. Nonetheless, like I said, I love my father. He gave me so many tools, and he loved me the best way he knew how, in spite of his addiction. And that is how I grasp with him not being here, knowing that he was battling this disease, this mental disease, this spiritual disease, but still finding a way to show up for me. I think it speaks volumes. I think it speaks volumes. The biggest thing I've learned from my father's passing is that you either accept or you intervene. There is no in between. My advice to anybody that's going through the process of grieving a parent, or if you're just somebody dealing with addiction on the outer level, on the outer surface, my advice to you is that rather my reality, my unruly guidance to you is that you will never be who you were before that shit happened. You will never be who you were before that shit happened. Death changes you. Grief changes you. Addiction changes you. And that's okay. I wouldn't expect for you to be who you were before that happened, because how would you grow? How would you know what to do if the opportunity comes back again, if the moment loops around again? Sometimes you got to go through dirt, right? In order for you to sprout, in order for you to reach the sky. I don't want to be who I was before my dad died, because I wouldn't be who I am right now. To all the little girls out there, hug your daddy. You don't know what type of battles he's facing out in the world. Thank you for letting me be vulnerable. This is definitely a reality of my life. And as I navigate through media, as I transfer into another area of media, I'm excited to see how I create now, how I feel now, how I envision now that he's not here physically. But also, how do I make peace with what was and accepting a new normalcy? Sending love and light to all of y'all, man.